Hello, this is McLaine speaking. Before we get into the presentation, I'd like to take a few minutes and say a few things about global warming, because this is a serious issue. This presentation is not about global warming. It is basic science and new discoveries I've made about the true nature of weather creation and how we can eliminate the threat and damage from hurricanes and tornadoes. I would like to say that we absolutely need to stop polluting our earth and home, and we need to convert from carbon-based fuel to all electric. And we need to do that quickly. I'm going to say a lot of things about weather science and where it is wrong, but I'm not saying they are wrong about global warming. This is about some of my new discoveries, which are profound, which existing weather science does not understand and does not even seem to know about. So I'm going to make a lot of claims in the beginning of this presentation about hurricanes and tornadoes. At the end of the presentation, several ways we can stop, move, and kill them, which may sound really far out, and some people may even call me crazy. So I'm going to make a lot of claims in the beginning about weather creation, and as we go through the presentation, in the middle, I'm going to justify every one of those claims, and I'm going to show you video and photos and basic science as irrefutable proof that my claims are true and that my theory of weather creation is correct. This presentation is not a scientific presentation in terms of scientific jargon which no one understands except PhDs. This has been created and written for the average person with a high school education. I am an electronic engineer working from home with my wife, Carol McLaine, who has assisted in the research and has been writing and editing our work.
As a result of our research, we are convinced that tornadoes and hurricanes can be controlled and killed. Now we know that they are created by an electric discharge between electrons from the sky, which move to the ground to discharge with positively charged dust. This is the same process as a lightning strike. The only difference is a lightning strike takes a second or two, where a tornado takes a few minutes to several hours. So we have created the McLaine Institute for Tornado and Hurricane Mitigation Research to measure the electric charges in tornadoes and hurricanes, and to also design equipment that will be capable of stopping, moving, and killing them.
So you might be skeptical at first, but if you stay with me till the end, by the time we are through, I believe you will totally understand the true nature of weather creation and believe that what I am saying is absolutely true. So let's get started. According to the Weather Service, the United States is the most severe weather-prone country in the world. Each year, people in this country cope with an average of 10,000 thunderstorms, 5,000 floods, 1,200 tornadoes, and 2 major hurricanes hitting the U.S. Approximately 90% of all presidentially declared disasters are weather-related, causing around 500 deaths each year and $14 billion in damage. How can we kill tornadoes and hurricanes? In order to kill them, we need to know how they work. The existing theory is 300 years old and does not properly describe where they form or how they work. We now have satellites that show the real places they form and what drives them. Using this new data, I have developed a new theory of weather creation. By using this data, we can develop methods to stop their growth and kill them. What does hurricane theory say? NASA describes hurricanes as follows. A tropical cyclone are like giant engines that use warm, moist air as fuel. That is why they form only over warm ocean water near the equator.
the warm, moist air over the ocean rises upward from near the surface. Because the air moves up and away from the surface, there is less air left near the surface. Another way to say the same thing is that warm air rises, causing an area of lower pressure below. The photo on the left shows a tropical cyclone that has many cumulonimbus clouds. They form huge circular bands. Air from surrounding areas with higher air pressure pushes into the low pressure area. Then that new air becomes warm and moist and rises too. As the warm area continues to rise, the surrounding area swirls to take its place. As the warm, moist air rises, it cools off, then water and the air form clouds. My comment is, really? Why does it swirl? That's a description, not an explanation of why it spins. Descriptions are not explanations, so what force makes it spin? I know. Apparently NASA doesn't know. The swirl is caused by spinning magnetic fields which surrounds the inner core of the hurricane. Negative charges coming from the sky are in the center. The positive charges coming from the water are attracted to the negative charges. However, most of them don't get to discharge because negative charges have a magnetic field surrounding them, and the positive charges have a magnetic field surrounding them. So there are two magnetic fields which hold them apart. So the positive charges wrap themselves around the negative charges and move upward. Both of these are rotating counterclockwise. This is what makes the clouds spin. A hurricane is the extreme example of nature's way of opposite charges discharging. Existing NASA theory states hurricanes only form in the tropics when hot water rising makes them swirl. Whoops, the pictures show hurricanes also form at the North and South Pole. The truth is shown from pictures and videos from space is that hurricanes form at the equator and at the poles. So it can't be hot water that forms them. What meteorologists may not know is that hot water ionizes when it reaches about 85 degrees in the equatorial regions, and two molecules of H2O turn into H3O, a plus charge, and OH, a minus charge. So it is the charged particles at the equator that drive them. Water also ionizes when the water reaches about 35 degrees Fahrenheit at the poles. So it's cold ionized water at the poles and Birkeland currents entering the poles that drive the hurricanes at the North and South Pole. Notice the two hurricanes forming at the South Pole still attached to the ice pack. The American Meteorological Society, known as AMS, also says that hurricanes only form at the equator in hot water. They go on to state that hurricanes swirl because of the Coriolis force. That's wrong. There is no such thing as the Coriolis force. The Coriolis is a visual phenomenon seen from space because the Earth is turning. It's not a force. As an example, let's say you drive your car from Los Angeles to Sacramento, a distance of 384 miles north, and it took you 6 hours. During that 6 hours, the Earth would rotate 90 degrees to the right, which would be 6,215 miles. So if you were an observer from a point in space watching, it would appear you have gone 384 miles north, but also traveled in an arc to the right 6,200 miles. There were no forces moving you to the right. It's just a visual phenomenon, of the Earth turning to the right. So hot water or the Coriolis effect could not cause these two hurricanes. They have formed in place at the South Pole. They are created by spinning Birkeland currents entering around the poles, which makes the cloud spin clockwise at the South Pole because it is positive current entering from the sun. It's actually the rotating magnetic field created by the moving charges, aka Birkeland currents, which makes the clouds and ocean spin clockwise at the South Pole. At the North Pole, it's negative charges entering, which makes the hurricanes at the North Pole spin counterclockwise. These images are from nullschool.net. It shows that there are always circulating storms at our poles. Some months there are more and some months there are less. In 2016, NASA finally admitted they were there and started naming the ones which have wind speeds exceeding 74 miles per hour as official hurricanes. These images show the North Pole has cyclones spinning counterclockwise. According to Maxwell's equations, it must be negative charges moving from the sky to the Earth. The South Pole has cyclones spinning clockwise. This means there are positive charges coming from the sky to the Earth. These cyclones start at the surface and also create an overall air movement at about 9,000 feet and up, where the air creates one large circular vortex covering the entire polar region. They spin counterclockwise at the North Pole and clockwise at the South Pole. During some months of the year, these polar vortices expand in diameter and become rippled. In the north, they come down to Canada and even parts of the U.S. The southern vortex, which normally only covers the continent of Antarctica, stretches to include Australia and the bottom of South America. It is these vortices, along with the sun's track around the equator, which are the dominant forces creating our weather. And they are all created by moving charged particles and their rotating magnetic fields. Basic Science Review. Science is described by the four fundamental forces of nature. Everything in nature can be explained using these four basic forces. There are two atomic forces and two general forces. The atomic forces are a weak atomic force and a strong atomic force. The weak force is radioactive decay, the force of a neutron decaying into a proton and electron. The strong force is the force that holds the nucleus of an atom together. This is the force necessary to split an atom to create nuclear fission, basically the atomic bomb. The general forces are gravity, described by Newton in his equation F equals the gravitational constant times m1 times m2, two different masses, divided by the distance between them squared. Newton also wrote a lot of other physics equations, one being force equals mass times acceleration, and by using algebra you can say that means acceleration is the force divided by mass, and then speed is just acceleration times the time. So electromagnetism is described by Maxwell's four equations, and we'll get that to the next slide. The point that I'm making is that basically what science is saying is that only force can move an object, and all movement the size of an electron or larger are caused by the forces of gravity or electromagnetism. Maxwell looked at the existing work and integrated the concepts of Gauss, Faraday, and Ampere into four equations which you could determine the direction and force created by moving charges. Maxwell's equations are used by physicists and engineers to design electromechanical devices such as motors, generators, power transmission systems, transformers, lasers, fiber optics, hard drives, microwave antennas, and MRI machines, to name a few.
Maxwell's greatest contribution was in realizing that electricity and magnetism are just two sides of the same coin. He unified electric and magnetic fields with these four equations. These are the basic laws and equations for electromagnetism, which, along with gravity, are the only forces that move things larger than an electron. Also, these are the forces that create all chemical reactions. The Encyclopedia Britannica describes it this way: Maxwell's equations represent one of the most elegant and concise ways to state the fundamentals of electricity and magnetism. Maxwell's equations were created using vector calculus. He created them in both differential equations and integral equations. Not many people understand them other than a few physicists and electrical engineers. Notice on the left, one equation covers divergent E field, and the second one covers curl of the E field. The next two equations cover the B field, which is the magnetic field. In the next slide, we're going to explain the effect of the E field equations. Divergence and curl of E field simplified. The weather map shows high and low pressure area. Existing theory states everything in the sky is either a high pressure or low pressure area. The dividing line is 1,000 millibars. High is above 1,000 and low is below 1,000 millibars. High pressure areas unwind, diverge, and low pressure areas converge and wind into a center point. So the air moves from the high pressure to the low pressure area. So what determines the high and low? My theory, the low pressure area has a higher charge density, basically more charged particles. I have added below the weather chart a representation of Maxwell's equations on divergence of the E field, which shows that moving positive charges diverge and moving negative charges converge. So that agrees with what we see about the high pressure expanding and low pressure areas contracting. Next, we need to analyze the curl, basically which way the magnetic field spins with a moving charge. The curl can be determined by using the right hand and left hand rules. So do this with me. If you are following a negative charge, you use your left hand. Point the thumb into the low spot on the screen, then bend your fingers around to see that it is curling counterclockwise. Now do the same thing for positive charges moving from the sky into the high pressure area. Use your right hand and point your thumb into the screen at the high pressure spot, and notice your fingers are rotating clockwise.
So, positive charges are going into the high from the sky, and negative charges are going into the low. Everything works in accordance with Maxwell's equations of divergence and curl. So my theory must be correct. In fact, this is how I derived my theory. Now we have one more force to understand, gravity. Well, that's simple. Gravity only works one way, down. So gravity is contributing to the charges in the sky falling to the ground. NASA has also confirmed that we have between 10,000 and 1,000,000 electrons per every cubic centimeter falling from the ionosphere to the ground. I know from my research that the quantities can be many, many times that during storms on Earth or flares and CMEs from the sun.
So let's define wind, temperature, and pressure in terms of gravity and electromagnetism. Atoms of air will fall due to gravity. All other forces and movements are created by electromagnetism. Wind moves in all directions because the atoms in our atmosphere have positive and negative charges. Positive and negative charges attract each other. Like-charged particles repel each other. Temperature is created by charged particles hitting an atom in our atmosphere. When infrared light and charged particles hit an air or ocean, they release some of their kinetic energy to the atoms they hit, which makes the atoms vibrate and creates heat. So you can think about heating water. Your choices are electric stove, a microwave oven, and they are electromagnetic. A gas stove is a flame, which is a plasma, which is full of charged particles that hit the pan and make the iron molecules vibrate, transferring the kinetic energy to the pan. So all heat is electromagnetic. Pressure is caused by charged particles. The more the charges are the same polarity, the more they push atoms away, thus creating an area of less density and low pressure. The higher the concentration of charged particles, the lower the pressure. The lower the concentration of charged particles, the higher the pressure. Christian Birkeland was a plasma scientist from Norway. He lived from 1867 to 1970. He was the first person to discover that the auroras at the North Pole was a result of electric currents coming from the sun into the earth at the poles. The currents are being concentrated at the poles, and this is a higher density causing collisions with the nitrogen and oxygen in our atmosphere. This causes light to be emitted, which we call the aurora. Using his vacuum chamber in the center photograph, Birkeland observed that the charged particles coming from positive and negative emitters at each end of the vacuum chamber would tend to form magnetic fields around themselves. But they would also wind around each other, making what looked like braided rope, which has been named after him as the discoverer of these currents and how they work. On the left is Jupiter's North Pole, showing scarring of the pole where the pair of these currents are entering. The photo on the right shows NASA's depiction of these flux tubes, aka Birkeland currents, entering Saturn's North Pole from the Sun. Above on the left is Saturn, with Earth's South Pole in the middle, and Jupiter's on the right. I added a close-up of Saturn so you can see the circular pattern in the Birkeland currents with their magnetic fields, which looks like braided rope. In the center, you can see what looks like arches hitting the surface in two places. So these must be similar to the discharges on the sun when they form arches or bridges, which connect a positive and negative region together so they can discharge. Some of the planets, such as Mars, do not have a dense atmosphere, so it does not have any auroras. However, we still can see how these Birkeland currents create scars on their poles.
Birkeland discovered that negative charged particles enter the North Pole and form braided ropes. Also, we know that the South Pole has positive charges entering the Earth. But all of the previous research only talked about the currents entering the Earth and moving in only one direction. What I have come to realize is that there are streams of moving charges everywhere, and they are continuously moving towards each other to discharge. They discharge in all directions and all sizes, from molecular level to the galactic level. On Earth, they form huge arches between a positive point on the ground to a negative point on the ground. The sun is covered with these discharging arches, which can be easily seen because of the heat and light they create. On Earth, they are much weaker, so they don't create light. They create these discharges from water to water or land to land, forming arches in the sky. These are mostly unseen unless they interact with dirt or dust, or they create tube clouds and rotating storms. They also discharge between the sky and the ground or the water. The sun is continuously creating massive amounts of new charged particles as it moves around the Earth and ionizes the water in the equatorial regions. In the process of trying to discharge, these moving charges form magnetic fields. The positive magnetic fields are diverging, creating tubes. The negative particles squeeze together to move inside the tubes. At the opening, there can be some discharges, but since they are both moving towards each other, most of the negative charged electrons converge and squeeze together, moving inside the positive tube. The negative charges are green in the drawing and are moving towards the right in the picture. The positive charges are red and are moving in the opposite direction. Both of these streams of charges are creating a magnetic field, as shown by the fuzziness around the green and red moving charges. These magnetic fields actually hold the moving charges apart and stop them from discharging. So they are creating their own insulation, just like the coaxial cable you see above. These discharges can last for seconds, hours, even days or weeks in our atmosphere. At some point, one of these streams of charged particles will run out of charges. As it does, the coaxial magnetic tube start to break apart, which then allow for positive and negative charged particles to discharge at the break. Since no one has mentioned this in the scientific literature, I believe I have discovered something new. I have named them McLane's coaxial magnetic tubes, since they create what we know as coaxial cables in the air between positive and negative sources of charged particles. If you turn my drawing upright, it is negative on the top. You have the basic structure of all counterclockwise rotating storms. If you turn it the other way with positive on the top, you have the basic structure of all clockwise rotating storms, which is what you see in the southern hemisphere. I know this must be true because this agrees with Maxwell's equations of divergence and curl. Look at the arch below Australia. It is a 2,000-mile rotating tube cloud connecting hurricanes on both ends. The right end is also being fed from hot gas, aka charged particles, coming out of the ice pack. This is an example of a water-to-water discharge in process with McLane's coaxial magnetic tubes. There are two more smaller arches on the left. Now look at the photo on the right. When you look at the North Pole above, you can see my coaxial magnetic tube stretching to the equator. That's a distance of 6,000 miles. To the right of that tube is another tube arching in the sky and discharging with a positive dark gray tube coming out of the ocean. These are two more extreme examples of McLane's coaxial magnetic tubes.
What is plasma? Plasma is just ionized air. It has three modes of operation. The dark mode plasma is a low density of ions in the air, which are constantly discharging. They can discharge in several ways: earth to earth, earth to sky, and sky to sky. These can last for minutes, hours, or days. They cannot be seen unless they interact with clouds, dust, or water. Glow mode plasma is the northern lights, or aurora borealis, which are seen at the North Pole. This is a higher density of flowing ions. They are always at their poles and sometimes can be seen in thunderstorms lasting for seconds or minutes. In addition, fluorescent lights are glow mode plasma. Fast mode plasma is a higher concentrated density of ions which discharge in seconds as lightning. When we see the auroras, we can see what these flowing charges look like between the sky and the ground. Photo credit, visit South Iceland. Normally, we cannot see the currents flowing from the ionosphere to the ground because the current density is small. This is called a dark plasma discharge because we cannot see it. Charged particles, which are electric currents from the sun, are deflected by our magnetic field, and the electric currents slide along the lines of the magnetic field towards the poles. This is where they become more concentrated. When these fast-moving charges hit our atmosphere near the poles, they hit oxygen and nitrogen in our atmosphere, which makes them fluoresce, just like fluorescent light. These are called Birkeland currents that are plasmas in the glow mode. When we see auroras, we can see what they look like and their spinning nature. Electrical engineers know how the flow of current works in wires. We have Ohm's law to calculate the current flow. We do not know very much about electricity flowing in the clouds to the ground because they're dark plasma discharges, and we've not been trying to measure them because meteorologists are not taught about magnetic fields or Maxwell's equations. That's now changing, which I'll talk about in a few moments on how we can control storms and kill them. Why does plasma spin? When an electron or positive ion moves, it creates a reciprocating spinning magnetic field which surrounds it. This is the well-known laws of physics, first described by Maxwell and his famous equations on magnetic forces and how they are created by moving charged particles. And an easy way to determine the spin is by using your left-hand rule and right-hand rule. Birkeland currents can be miles across. When flowing charges create magnetic fields, they form a rotating circular structure around them. You can tell if they are positive or negative charges by the direction they spin as they enter the poles. At the North Pole, we have mostly negative charges entering and rotating the auroras counterclockwise. At the South Pole, it is mostly positive charges entering the Earth, so they are rotating clockwise. All extreme weather events have large quantities of charged particles. This shows a tsunami about to hit a town, and if you look how strange the wave is with these tubes coming out, and this one has a little tube coming out of its center. We have some other tubes coming down here. Coming up are negative charges, spikes coming into some of these tubes. If you follow around over here, you can actually see the opening of the tube. These other ones all have openings. They look like donuts from the end. And then here's a group of discharges going on from the ground up through here, through donuts, another donut, another donut, another donut, up to this point where it's discharging. You can kind of see the line right there above my cursor. Here's some ideas. Here's a big donut hole. If you look right along here, you can see a whole string of donut holes going up. Hole, 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 hole. Some of it's in the shade, so you don't see it very well. But basically, this is just huge quantities of charged particles in the process of trying to discharge. And realize these things are forming in just a few seconds as this wave created and breaks. Here we can see the charges in a volcano. If you look at all this dark matter, this is what's coming out of the volcano, and these little puffy things are all donuts. If you take a look, you'll see a hole in the middle of them all. They're facing all different directions. Here's a hole. Here's a big donut right there. Okay, here's a little donut there, a little donut there. Here's a discharge taking place, coming over here, going in there. Okay, here these clouds or the steam, you can see the tubes coming down, going into a hole. Here's another one. These are negative charges going into a positively charged hole, which is like a tube with a donut on the end. Another one going in. If we go, here's a big hole right here. You can see it's coming down this way, and this is the donut on the end of this hole. Again, they're all over the place. This here, you can see a hole there, hole here, donut hole there, donut hole here. Here's tube coming out with a donut hole on the end. Here's another littler one. And we look here where the clouds are coming down. You can see they're going into these donut holes, going into the donut hole to discharge. So these are actually discharges taking place. So here we have actually several hurricanes. This is Greenland up here, and Florida's down there to give you a little perspective. Here's Baja California. And so we have several hurricanes in this picture. And let's take this one to start with. What we can see is that that hurricane has a tail coming down, and it's actually discharging the ocean here. But all of these little spikes coming down, these are all discharges taking place. Look like little waterfalls. These are discharges taking place all along the edges here. Okay, here between this one and the next one, that's a discharge taking place. So here we also have another cyclone in the center here, and if you look close, you can actually see these tubes going right into the center there. They're all going into the middle. These are negative charges going into a positive charge. Okay, if you look here, you can kind of see this is one of these tubes that had positive charges on the outside, and they have negative charges on the center. And this thing had broken apart because there wasn't enough charges running through there to hold that magnetic field together. This is more of a conventional type of a hurricane that we see. And what is actually going on here is that negative charges are going right into the center there. Okay, right down to the center to the ocean. When they get to the ocean, they split up based upon where positive charges are down there. But they usually split up in bands, and they kind of go out this way. This is actually one of the negative charges coming from the center of the hurricane down to the water, and then runs along here, okay, and into the water. Here's another one, okay. So they have these bands, and what happens is these are negatively charged, and they'll discharge on the ends, but because they have a magnetic field around them, positive charges end up winding around them, can't actually discharge, but are being pulled up because there's always more charges above it. So positive charges move around, and they actually come up just outside the center ring, and all the positive charges come up to the top where they can discharge with the negative sky.
To be clear, the point that I'm making in the last three photos is that all weather events are caused by charged particles, from earthquakes, which create tsunamis, to volcanoes and all spinning storms. I'm explaining them in terms of the only two forces that move things, which are electromagnetism and gravity. If you explain them in terms of temperature, pressure, and wind speed, you are only talking about the effects of these basic forces. These photos show the results of lightning when it strikes sand. It melts the sand and creates these glass objects. The photo on the right is obviously the result of a negative lightning strike, which creates these long spikes with pointed ends. The photo on the left has tubes with donuts or flowers on the ends, which means it must have been a positive strike. This was a turning point in my research because it led me to start looking for videos of lightning strikes and what positive and negative charges must look like. These are screenshots of a lightning strike. The photo on the right was taken from a video clip just before the lightning was hitting, and it shows that it comes to a point as it hits the ground. The image on the left is just a fraction of a second earlier. What I thought was amazing was the positive charges came out of the ground to meet it, as shown by the gray tubes with holes in the end for the negative charges to enter. You can also see a haze, which I believe are charged particles with lower densities covering the area. Even the concrete walkway in front of the fence has circles, which I believe were created by dust. We can learn a lot from dust devils. They're small and there's lots of them, so they're a great place to learn how circulating storms work. Meteorologists have several different descriptions on how they work. The main one is that they form on a shear line between winds that are moving in opposite directions. So I'm asking you, do you see wind blowing in two different directions? So did you see wind blowing in two directions? It looked calm to me, except for the dust devil, which is spinning very fast, and the power is obviously coming from the inside. So this fits with my theory that rotating storms are coaxial magnetic tubes, where negative charges move to the ground to discharge and positive charges move to the sky to discharge. But when they are moving in the tubes, they create counterclockwise rotating magnetic fields which spin the tubes and hold the charged particles apart like insulation in a coaxial cable. So they can't discharge until they reach the end of the tubes. This is a different dust devil. You can clearly see the inner core. If you look at the left, you can also see a spike going into a donut hole. That's a discharge taking place between electrons coming from the sky to positive charged dust on the ground. I color enhanced the image to make it easier to see. If you look closer, you can see several more discharges above and below the main spike. So we're following the dust devil into the sky to find its origin. The gray-brown dust devil looks like it's discharging with a white cloud to the left. You can see a large tube it's going into. You can also see at the bottom of the screen, looks like the dust devil is starting to break apart. Now in the top left corner you can see what looks like several discharges taking places between tubes and donuts. So here as we get to the bottom, you can see it's almost finished because it's running out of dust. You couldn't see the broken coaxial magnetic tube very well, so I freeze framed it and enhanced the colors. So now you can clearly see a small tube coming down, which is made by the electrons, and the larger tube going up with the positively charged dust, with a hole in the middle for the electrons. The dust devil left scars in the ground. The charges are no longer flowing, so this is a fingerprint that a discharge took place here. When the moving charges create the magnetic field, there is some reaction that takes place which creates a skeletal record of the discharge. It's probably creating molecular-sized permanent magnets that are all sticking together. In the center of the dust devil is a white circular shape. It is surrounded by a deep groove where the negative tail sweeps around, pulling up positive charges. If you follow it to the right, you can see donut holes everywhere. Following the small negative tube to the right goes into a large tube, which are all positive charges coming back. You can also see that there's tubes going back into the screen there, all the donuts holes along the sides, and below there's 2 or 3 more rows of donut holes going back there, and even some discharges going in at the bottom. This is a positive to negative tube that's going along, goes into a positive, into another negative, and it keeps getting smaller and smaller as it gets to the end, and then it finally goes a very tiny little charge going straight down into the ground. This is a Japanese satellite called Himawari, meaning sunflower. It takes high-res photos of Earth. At night it switches to thermal imaging. Near the equator on the right you can see a yellow smudge. That's the reflection of the sun, which moves from right to left. As the sun tracks along the equator, it ionizes the water and pulls the water in the clouds to the left as it passes. This is what causes the water at the equator to always move west. I have reversed the video so you can see the movement of the clouds as the sun passes and pulls them. Look at the North Pole. You can see a polar hurricane just to the right. These polar hurricanes are important drivers of our weather. You can see a 4,000-mile hurricane tail, which is being pulled northeast to the pole. This tail is a coaxial magnetic tube and functions just like a tropical hurricane. The hurricane is rotating counterclockwise, and its rotation that's pulling the entire coaxial magnetic tube to the North Pole. It is these rotating polar hurricanes, both at the North and South Poles, which by their spinning pulls charged particles, aka clouds, being created in the equatorial regions to the North and South Pole. This is the dominant weather pattern of Earth. Watch the hurricane just above the equator get pulled north by a cloud above it. I stopped the video so you can see the hurricane has been turned on its side, so you can also see the size of the gray-brown coaxial tubes below it, which are feeding it positive charges. These are images from the Galileo satellite. It shows hot gas, which is charged particles, coming out of the South Pole ice pack. What's more amazing is after it rises up thousands of feet into the sky, it turns around, comes back down, and flows into a magnetic tube, which is also stretching several thousand miles north. This is just one more example of charged particles coming out of the ground to discharge with opposite charges. Copyright 2018 EUMETSAT. These images are not photos. They are satellite radiant sensor data with shorelines and continents superimposed. My narration is my interpretation of this data. This is my attempt to explain the interactions in terms of the basic forces of nature, which are gravity and electromagnetism. They have not been reviewed or approved by EUMETSAT or any meteorological organization. As the sun sweeps across the equator, it ionizes the dust in Africa and the ocean. This causes the water to follow the sun moving west. Watch Hurricane Irma discharge with charges coming out of South America. Then see it get pulled by a tube cloud above it to the north as it gets stripped from most of its charges. The European Union meteorological satellite data is running at 1.5 seconds for 1 day of rotation. So most of these discharges only take a few hours to several days. Notice Hurricanes Maria and Lee are about to start discharging with a magnetic tube above them and will then be pulled north away from the USA. This proves that major hurricanes can be moved using charged particles. Keep your eyes on Hurricane Nate. It's about to be grabbed by charges above it and pulled right out of the Gulf. These tubes are like coaxial cables with a negative current running in the center and positive charges wrapping around the center core and moving in the opposite direction. Since negative charges converge, they come to a point at their end. Take a look at Hurricane Ophelia. It's about to get sucked up. There it goes. Positive moving charges diverge and create a wide opening tube which sometimes splits and opens like an alligator mouth. Other times they form what look like a donut or a flower on the end with a hole in the middle for the negative charges. Each one of these tubes have a positive end and a negative end. So when they connect to each other, they are positive to negative, then positive to negative cascades. These tubes have the ability to downsize if they're running out of charges. They can extend their reach by creating a smaller diameter extension tube to reach out and get closer so they can connect with another tube that's too far away. You can see this happening on South America. It almost looks like they're alive, but they're not. They're just doing what charged particles do, which is attracting opposite charges and repelling similar charges. Realize that the pulling force of charged particles increases by the square of the distance between them. So if the distance between them went from 20 feet to 10 feet, the pulling force would go up 100 times. Pacific Ocean on the left, we can see streams of charges coming out of the ocean. The ones just north of the equator move to the north, and the ones south of the equator move to the south. You can see these clouds moving from the equator to the South Pole move north slightly as they round South America. Then you can see they stretch back towards these charges and suck them up and pull them with them to the South Pole. These erratic movements can only be explained by attraction of opposite charges. Notice the correlation of the flashing of the ground as the sun passes over, and the cloud formation a fraction of a second later. This shows that it is the sun that creates clouds. In real time, it's a few hours later. This is a close-up of North Africa. To the right is the Suez Canal. There are charged clouds over Europe. Watch white clouds come out of the desert. At first they're being pulled towards the north, towards Italy. Then they switch directions and go back into the ground in the desert. Then part of them break away and go back towards Europe. This demonstrates a ground-to-ground discharge, which took 2 days to complete. It also shows charges being pulled in 2 directions by other charges. Now I'm going to freeze the clouds so you can see that they are coming up as a tube of charged particles. These are stretching thousands of feet into the sky. Negative electrons from the sun meet positive charges from the ground is the point that the clouds form, and when positive and negative particles meet to discharge. But there must be some other factors, because we see discharges everywhere, and most of them are not creating white clouds. So what have we learned? All clouds and twisting storms are caused by dark plasma discharge. We also know that spinning clouds, tornadoes, and hurricanes are caused by magnetic fields created from moving charges. Therefore, we can stop, move, and kill any circulating storm with magnetic fields and electric charges. We can use the well-known equations of electric charge and electromagnetism as defined by Maxwell to design machines that will move, stop, and kill spinning storms. What's next? Since this is just McLane's theory of storm creation, we need to prove it. Our first goal is to measure the electrons flowing in a dust devil. At the same time, we can demonstrate the ability to control the movements of a dust devil by replacing the positive charges from Earth with our own stronger positive charges. We can use a 6-foot diameter metal platter and connect it to a power supply's positive terminal. We put the platter on a boat trailer and pull it with a pickup truck. When the dust devil gets close, we turn on the power. The negative charges from the dust devil will then move to our platter. Once we are connected, we drive away making donuts and figure eights, and the dust devil will follow. 3. Weaken and kill a dust devil by inserting calcium, a +2 ion, into the dust devil. We can control tornadoes and hurricanes. No one should lose their home or business. No one should be injured or die. We can restrain them in one place, and we can move them away from cities and people. We can weaken their strength and kill them. The infrared photo above is a satellite view of a hurricane which shows the rings at the eye, and which has negative charges from the sky moving to the ground in the center. The secondary ring has positive charges coming up from the ocean. The left animation shows the positive charges in the outer ring moving out the top of the hurricane where it discharges. A hurricane is an extreme event of nature's mechanism that allows for positive and negative charges to discharge. These are screenshots of a lightning strike. The photo on the right was taken from a video clip just before the lightning was hitting, and it shows that it comes to a point as it hits the ground. The image on the left is just a fraction of a second earlier. What I thought was amazing was the positive charges came out of the ground to meet it, as shown by the gray tubes with holes in the end for the negative charges to enter. You can also see a haze, which I believe are charged particles with lower densities covering the area. Even the concrete walkway in front of the fence has circles, which I believe were created by dust. This is a different dust devil. You can clearly see the inner core. If you look at the left, you can also see a spike going into a donut hole. That's a discharge taking place between electrons coming from the sky to positive charged dust on the ground. I color enhanced the image to make it easier to see. If you look closer, you can see several more discharges above and below the main spike. This is Japan's Himawari satellite. Notice the hurricane just above the equator. I stopped the video so you can see the hurricane has been turned on its side, so you can also see the size of the gray-brown coaxial tubes below it, which are feeding it positive charges.
Negative charges from the sky go through the eye of the hurricane and into the water to create these tentacles in the water. They attract positively charged dust, which wraps around the negative charges and moves to the top of the hurricane, where they discharge with negative charges coming from the sky. This is just another example of my coaxial magnetic tubes.
So what have we learned? Tornadoes and hurricanes are the same. The only difference is that they are larger than dust devils and have multiple discharges taking place at the same time, as evidenced by multiple waterspouts in hurricanes and multiple funnels in tornadoes. They can also generate positive and negative charges in their clouds when the temperature drops to 35 degrees, which causes the water to ionize and split into positive and negative charges just before it freezes. They all rotate because the moving charges create a rotating magnetic field which makes them spin. So what have we learned? We know that spinning clouds, tornadoes, and hurricanes are caused by magnetic fields created from moving charges. Therefore, we can stop, move, and kill any circulating storm with magnetic fields and electric charges. We can use the well-known equations of electric charges and magnetism as defined by Maxwell to design machines that will stop, move, and kill any spinning storm. I have confirmed that everything I've said in this presentation agrees with Maxwell's equations of divergence and curl. Using charged particles to weaken, move, and kill a storm. We can firebomb a storm using a positive ions like calcium with a +2 charge to neutralize the negative charges coming from the sun. Basically, a hurricane is what I described as a coaxial magnetic tube of negative charges coming from the sky, which discharge on the top of the hurricane with positive charges coming from the ocean. If we can stop either of these flowing charges, the hurricane will weaken and die. So if we flood the sky with positive charges above the hurricane and neutralize the negative charges coming from the sun so that none or only a small portion of them reach the top of the hurricane, the magnetic tubes will break apart and the positive and negative charges will discharge at the breaks, and the hurricane will weaken and die within 24 hours. We can use microwave beams or lasers to move and kill tornadoes and hurricanes. You saw how clouds of charged particles moving to the North Pole were able to connect to hurricanes Maria, Lee, Nate, and Olivia and pull them north. We can assist a moving cloud to connect with the hurricane by reducing the resistance in the air between the passing cloud and the hurricane. We can connect them electrically by using lasers or microwave transmitters to ionize the air between the hurricane and the clouds of charged particles, so the hurricane would be pulled north by the cloud away from the U.S. We can also kill them by burning holes in the eye of the storm, where the negative charges move to the ground. The charges will be able to discharge at the holes and the storm will die. High-powered microwave transmitters and high-powered lasers already exist, so we only need to integrate the delivery system, probably a large drones or commercial aircraft with large generators and battery/capacitor banks to power them. Hurricanes at sea can be killed instantly. Hurricanes at sea can be blown apart by an electromagnetic pulse, aka an EMP weapon, non-nuclear of course. For large hurricanes, we may need several EMP devices. They will also burn out electronic equipment, so the area would need to be far out at sea, and ships and airplanes must be diverted away from the area. A static charged smart lightning rod array can protect a city from a tornado or hurricane. Tornadoes move because they need positive charges from the ground. Tornadoes are repulsed by negative charges near the ground. A city can be protected with a smart lightning rod array, which can be charged with negative charges from the power grid, or they can be configured as a mobile unit of 100 trucks equipped with portable lightning rods and a generation system, which could be set up in a few hours. A magnetic field fence is another way to stop a tornado or hurricane. Since tornadoes and hurricanes are full of negative and positive charges, a magnetic field fence will stop it from moving toward the magnetic field. An electromagnet is created by running a pulsed current through a large winding of electric wire. The magnetic field fence could also be configured as a mobile unit of 100 trucks with all the equipment on board and could be quickly positioned around the area to be protected.
Hello, this is Ray McLaine speaking. The McLaine Institute was formed to fund the science that is necessary to design the equipment capable of stopping, moving, and killing dust devils, tornadoes, and hurricanes. The main problem in obtaining institutional funding is my theory does not agree with mainstream meteorology science, and I'm just an electronic engineer, not a PhD. So to obtain funding, we are building a grassroots organization of volunteers and donors from people that will benefit the most. For hundreds of years, the educational institutions have taught us that tornadoes are caused by swirling winds and hot dust rising, and hurricanes are formed and fueled by hot water rising, not electrical discharge, which is my theory. I have shown you the videos and the photographic proof that my theory is correct. My theory was also derived from Maxwell's equations of divergence and curl, which are used to design electric motors, generators, transformers, etc. Every electrical engineer and physicist learns Maxwell's equations. Unfortunately, meteorology students do not. They live in the world of temperature, pressure, and wind speed, and that works for them in predicting the weather. And now with computer simulations, their predictions work very well. But temperature, pressure, and wind are not forces of nature. It takes a force to move the wind. They are only the effects of gravity and electromagnetism, which are the two general forces of nature. That's basic physics. Actually, there is some peer-reviewed science which supports my theory, where researchers were measuring electric fields in dust devils. In a research paper called the Matador Project, a dust devil came through their base camp near Eloy, Arizona. An arm with an electric field sensor was able to measure the electric field in the central core of the dust devil. What they measured was that the voltage was 0 until they hit the core, where it immediately dropped to a minus 4,300 volts negative, indicating that electrons were moving from the sky to the ground. When the dust devil moved further and the sensor left the core, it immediately went back up to 0 volts. So this supports my theory that all circulating storms are caused by spinning magnetic fields created by electrons from the sky moving to the ground to discharge with positively charged dust. Also, in their descriptions of the experiment, they said their meter saturated out because it had been set at the most sensitive setting. So they really didn't know the true maximum of the voltage, and it was probably much higher than minus 4,300 volts. Now, if meteorological professors acknowledge that it is electrical discharge, just like lightning strike, just slower and weaker, then they have been teaching the wrong science to students for hundreds of years. So they will probably resist my theory. It's not their fault. They were just repeating what they learned. And if they go against the orthodox descriptions, they may lose their teaching credential. The History Channel says, question everything you have ever been taught. Now I understand why. We are seeking to raise $500,000. With that money, we will design and build equipment that will stop, move, and kill dust devils. Dust devils are a good place to start because they are small, weaker, and there are lots of them. I believe this can be accomplished in 1 or 2 years. Once we have video proof that our equipment will stop, move, and kill dust devils, then it's just a matter of scale. Even meteorologists admit that dust devils are the same process as tornadoes, even though they really don't know the process. We just increase the size and strength of our static charges and magnetic fields approximately 10, maybe 20 times to be able to control tornadoes. This should be completed in another 2 years with an additional $2 million in funding. If we are successful in raising $2.5 million this year, we would create 2 teams, one starting on measuring dust devils and the other on tornadoes, which would speed up the development time by about a year. Then hurricanes would be the focus of our research and testing. High-powered laser beams and microwave transmitters are already in use in the military. So it would just be a matter of getting permission to be able to buy the equipment from the current manufacturers for our purposes. We also need a delivery system, which could also be military drones. At this point, the military may decide to take responsibility to protect us from hurricanes. If not, we would seek a major aerospace company as a partner. The McLaine Institute for Tornado and Hurricane Mitigation Research is a 501c3 nonprofit, so your donations are tax deductible. Please go to tornadokillers.org and volunteer, or make a donation. You will find a list of positions needed, everything from C-level management to part-time clerical workers working from home. This will be a great adventure. Remember the movie Twister? We plan to have groups of storm chasers in all the Tornado Alley states. So whether you are a PhD or a cook, we need your help, especially the brave who will become tornado wranglers to place our equipment in front of a tornado and take control of the tornado's movements and kill it. We need photographers and writers to document the events. We need organizers, engineers, etc. College students, ask your college if they have a program where you can earn 4 units of credit for working for a nonprofit. Send us their documents. We will complete them so you can get college credits for helping us. Maybe you don't have the time to take a week or 2 off from work or to help. Then go to tornadokillers.org now and make a contribution. Share this information and ask your friends to go to our website. Without your help, it could take another 20 or 30 years before the meteorologists accept the reality that all circulating storms are just an electric discharge between the sky and the ground, like a lightning strike, just much slower. We have the technology today. We just need enough people to join us and provide funding. So please help us save you, your family, your friends from tornadoes and hurricanes. Thank you.